When I was on patrol at Yosemite National Park a few years ago, this happened. I was on a two-person patrol in the park's back country. Our job was to watch over a large area, and help if anything went wrong. The sun wasn't up yet, so it was still pretty dark outside. We were out all night, and now we're driving my truck back to the ranger station. When my partner said he had to go to the bathroom, we pulled the truck over to a wide spot with some trees and got out. My partner said he would be right back. So I went outside to stand. As I stood there looking around, I heard a growl coming from about 50 to 75 yards away down a hillside. It was pretty dark, so I thought it was probably a mountain lion. I had heard that sound before a lot of times. While on patrol, I stood there for another minute until my partner came back from behind the truck. He said, "Sounds like a mountain lion," and it did. When we see something move across the road, we both get back in the truck. What ran across the road was huge and had dark brown fur. It happened so quickly that it was like a blur. We tried to figure out what it was for another minute as we sat there. Now, keep in mind that the sun hadn't risen yet, so it was still kind of hard to see. But we did see something cross the road. It was big and had dark brown fur, which we could tell. As we sit there, we hear a faint crying sound coming from the hillside below us. I thought I heard a baby crying. My partner and I got out of the truck with our flashlights and started walking toward the sound. As we went down the hill, the crying got louder and louder. When we finally got to where the crying was coming from, there was a baby there, but it wasn't a human baby. Now the story starts to get strange. This thing looks like a human, and a wolf had a baby. I'm kind of speechless and shocked right now as I stand there and look at what looks like some kind of werewolf creature. What we saw at the top of the road must have been the mother. My friend takes it and starts to walk up the hill. I asked, "Are you sure that's the right move? We just saw something huge run across the road. It could return at any time." He said, "We can't just leave this baby out here by itself." So we go back up the hill, get in the truck, and take the baby back to the ranger station. This thing is making all kinds of strange noises and opening its mouth like it's hungry. It didn't have a full set of teeth, but its front teeth had well-developed canines. About an hour after we got back to the station, the morning shift arrived. My boss said he would make some calls and take care of it. We went home for the day with our partner. But I kept thinking about that little animal until I had to go to work that night. Let's jump ahead to that night. When I got back to work, I asked other rangers what had happened to the baby we had brought in. They asked, "What kid?" When I told them what happened, they kind of laughed and said, "Yeah, right." So I sent a text to my boss to find out what happened. He told me it was taken care of, and that was the end of it. And don't tell anyone else about this. "What do you mean, what happened to that baby?" I asked again. He told her that if she wanted to keep her job, she should not tell anyone and not ask any questions. It has been taken care of, and that part of the park needs to be closed for the next 14 days. So that's where it ended. Since I left there last year, I haven't heard anything, so I still don't know what this thing was. But they don't want us to know what it was, that's for sure. Just last week, this took place. Since I've been a park ranger for the last 12 years, the story is still coming together. I've worked in a few different parks, but one park has been where I've spent most of my time. Only 2 roads lead into the park, which is surrounded by thousands of acres of undeveloped land. Both are made of gravel, and neither is taken care of in the winter. The closest town is about 15 miles away, and cell phone service is hard to come by out here. I've had a lot of strange things happen to me at work, but this one takes the cake. I got a call from another ranger who was checking on one of our campsites in the backcountry. He said that he came across a campsite that was a mess and showed signs of a fight. He asked me to come out to the site and take a look. After about 15 minutes, I got there and walked with him into the camp area. First, I saw that the tent was leaning to one side, but it looked like someone did it on purpose because half of the stakes were pulled out of the ground. Large drag marks led from the tent to an old fire pit where charcoal had been dug up and spread around. The second thing I noticed was that there were pieces of broken glass all over the campsite. This is unusual for this park because we don't allow any kind of glass container on our backcountry sites. This park is home to bears and other animals. So we don't want people to leave anything behind that could hurt them or their food. I looked through the tent for clues about who might have been staying there, and I found a sleeping bag with a lot of blood on it. The tent also smelled terrible, like rotting garbage. At this point, my heart started racing because I knew something bad had happened here, but I still didn't know exactly what happened or who might have been involved. I called the local police, and about 20 minutes later, 2 sheriff's deputies and the state trooper who patrols this area often because it is so far away showed up at the campsite. They looked around the campsite and inside the tent, where they found the sleeping bag with blood on it. They took pictures of everything and put up signs so no one else could come in and mess things up. The smell inside the tent was so bad that the sheriff's deputies had to form a mass. After they were finished, I could tell them what had happened. They told me that it looked like someone had been beaten, and dragged out of the tent, and into the woods. They found signs of a fight and some big clumps of reddish-brown fur. It was much bigger than a bear's fur. Search and rescue teams are looking for this man right now. I hope that we can find him. This happened in southern Florida in the fall of 2017. I was driving my patrol car down the road when all of a sudden, a man ran in front of it. I didn't have time to stop, so I hit him at 40 miles per hour. As soon as I hit him, his body flew into the air and landed on top of my car. It sounded like an explosion had happened in my car, and the impact broke the windshield. The man's body slid off my hood and landed on the ground with a thud. I jumped out of my car and ran over to where he landed. Blood was everywhere because his head had hit a rock that was sticking out of the ground. There were pieces of glass in his face, arms, legs, and chest, and he wasn't moving at all. I used my radio to call for help while I looked for signs of life. I touched his neck to see if he was still alive, but there was no heartbeat, and he wasn't breathing. While I was listening to my radio and looking at him, he suddenly turned his head and looked at me with a very angry face. He grabbed both of my hands and pulled me toward him until our faces were touching. His eyes were like fireballs of red light. He started yelling at me in a language I hadn't heard before. It sounded like animals were being hurt right next to your ear. Then he used his teeth to bite hard into my shoulder. They cut right through my uniform shirt like it wasn't there. It felt like they were made of steel or something. I yelled at him to let go because it was killing me. But he kept biting me harder and harder until all that came out of his throat was gurgling sounds. As soon as he stopped biting me, he let go and straightened back up. It was as if nothing had happened. I took my gun out of its holster and put it to his head. I told him to get down, but he just stood there with those red eyes, staring at me. He was still covered in pieces of glass. I told him to get down, but he bent down, picked up a big rock, and threw it at me. I didn't have enough time to move out of the way, so it hit me in the chest and knocked me down. Because of how hard he threw it, I aimed my gun at him, pulled the trigger, and shot him in the chest. 3 times, the bullets went right through his chest without hurting him. He didn't even move. Even though he was covered in blood, he kept walking toward me like nothing was wrong. I shot him all the way through, but he kept coming at me until the ambulance got there. I could hear the sirens that scared him enough to turn around and run into the woods. While I tried to explain what had happened, they started to treat my bites. How could the guy still be alive if he died when my car hit him? Everything moved so quickly. It seems like time has stopped or something. When he walked toward me, I could see every detail of his face, and everything else around us was also very clear. Before he let go of my shoulder and stood up straight again, it felt like an eternity. I went to the hospital in an ambulance, where they treated my injuries and gave me painkillers for the bite marks on my shoulder. When I got home later, all over my shoulder and neck were bite marks from him. When my wife saw them everywhere, she went crazy. 5 hours passed while a group of us looked for this man in the woods. No sign of him could be found anywhere. I can't say what this thing was or who it was. I've been a police officer for about 5 years, and I've seen some crazy things, but nothing like what happened to me last month. It was 2:30 in the morning, when my partner and I were on our usual patrol route. We were driving down a residential street when all of a sudden my partner said, "What the hell is that?" When I look up, I see a bright light in the sky. It was just above the line of trees. I pulled over to get a better look. My partner and I get out of the car and start walking toward this light. We could hear this high-pitched sound coming from it as we got closer. It sounded like someone or something was screaming, but no words came out. We looked at each other because neither of us had ever heard anything like that before. We kept walking toward it until it got to the edge of the woods, where we saw what looked like a huge craft with lights on all sides hovering about 100 feet above the ground. We just stood there for about 5 minutes and listened to this thing scream while it flew above us. My partner finally said, "Let's go back to the car and call this in." The last thing I remember is that I woke up at 6 a.m. on the ground next to my partner. I tried to wake him up by shaking him, but he was still asleep. When I looked at him, I saw that he had a big cut on his forehead and dried blood all over his face. I tried again and again to wake him up, but he just wouldn't. So when I got back to my car, I called the police right away. They told me that other people in different parts of the city had also seen this thing. My partner was also sent an ambulance. Both of us ended up at the hospital, where they gave us some tests. Before they let us go home, we were there for about 6 hours. In the end, my partner was fine. We took a few days off and went back to work the next week, but our captain told us that because of what had happened, we were being put on desk duty until further notice. No one knows what it is or where it came from, he said. Since then, we haven't been able to go on patrol again. It's been about 3 weeks since then. So I don't know if anyone else has seen this thing since then or if anyone knows more about what's going on than we do right now.